The only thing lacking from your presentations is the actual disclaimer. I want to make it very clear, the FDA does not approve HCG for weight loss. In fact, they've actually came out in the 1970s and made the statement very clearly that they do not recognize it, and that HCG does not increase weight loss any more so than a very low-calorie diet, nor does it cause any type of body sculpting. I can tell you that from my personal clinical practice of over 15 years using HCG for my patients, we have found definitively just the opposite. Now that's from our clinical practice, and obviously that's limited to the tens of thousands of patients that we've seen, but that's what we've experienced. So that's what this disclaimer at the bottom here is. The FDA, the contents of this presentation have not been reviewed or approved by the FDA. In fact, the FDA has stated that HCG does not contribute to weight loss or body sculpting any more than any other very low-calorie diet. What we have here at the top, though, are some pictures of people who've actually used the HCG product. Myself and my wife. I went from 230 pounds to 183 pounds, so 47 pounds. My wife went from a size 20 to a size 12. My partner, Craig, in our Deerfield location, went from 230 pounds to, I think, 187. So pretty significant changes. So the premise of the HCG diet and the protocol is threefold. A person can consume a nominal amount of outside calories while using the HCG, lose weight, and not be excessively hungry. The second aspect is the protocol tends to rid the body of abnormal fat rather than subcutaneous or organ cushioning fat. Finally, patients will typically keep the weight off for an extended period of time, rather than immediately regaining that weight as seen in most very aggressive diet programs. The key to this is that with HCG, and again we've seen this statistically in our clinical practice, is that patients not only lose weight, but they lose fat. In a very, very low-calorie diet, it's rare for a patient to lose more than about 10% of fat. The vast majority of what they lose is muscle and water. With HCG, according to our statistics of what we've reviewed with our patients in our studies, we've seen between 60 and 80% of the weight loss for every pound loss is fat. The remainder being about 3 to 5% muscle and the remainder extracellular water. The benefits of the plan are obviously rapid weight loss due to a very low-calorie diet, a VLCD, a high-fat percentage of weight loss, which is atypical of most VLCDs, very low-calorie diets, low muscle wasting, which I just described to you, and increased basal metabolic rate. And that's the follow-up, is that when you lose a lot of weight, but you've lost fat instead of muscle, what's remaining there percentage-wise is a higher percentage of muscle. With that higher percentage of muscle, for every pound that you weigh, a larger portion is going to be calorie burning. So what is the actual diet? Obviously, there's a lot of different diets out there that are very popular, the Atkins diet, Paleo diet, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, and all these have a place and have all been studied, and some have been shown to be more successful than others. HCG, though, was not included in any of these studies, and so there's no comparative data that's available in the conventional literature. The diet itself, there are several phases. There's 3 phases. Phase 1 is treatment. It consists basically of 3 components. Days 1 and 2 are gorge days. You're using HCG, but you're eating large amounts of fat. And this seems to jumpstart that process. So you eat as much fatty food as possible, limited amount of carbohydrates, but if indeed a person wants to have carbs, that's completely okay. But they're going to eat a large amount of fat. And again, that gets that fat moving from the preserve or reserve fat stores into the bloodstream ultimately. And this will also help to prevent hunger, especially in the first couple of weeks, or a couple of days or a couple of weeks of the diet. The treatment with the HCG actually then steps forward days 3 through 40. And that's depending on whether you're doing a full 40-day cycle or if you're doing an abbreviated cycle. So we're going to talk about a 40-day cycle. The diet consists of 500 calories per day and an extreme amount of fluid intake. Adequate fluid intake is 2 to 3 liters of fluid a day. This can include water, soda water or sparkling water, stevia-flavored water, tea or coffee. You're allowed a limited amount of milk in your coffee a day, a tablespoon, and you're allowed up to 1 lemon or the juice of 1 lemon daily. There's no additional sugars or starches besides the things that are described in the vegetables and the fruits. While you're on the HCG, your body is releasing between 1,500 and 4,000 calories a day, typically, of calories into your system that you're able to live on. So you're not living on that 500 calorie diet. you're living on 1,500 to 4,000 plus 500. So 2,000 to 4,500 calories a day is what you're actually living on. And as a result, you really don't have a tremendous amount of hunger in the experience, in my personal experience and those of my patients. Now, when you finish up the 40 days of the HCG diet, of the actual weight loss portion, you go into your first motion or first portion of transition. And that's a 3-day duration, and that's where you're still having 500 calories a day, but you're not taking any HCG. So this is your transition phase moving in to where it becomes much easier. And we're going to go over all this in a little bit more detail. It takes about 72 hours for the HCG to get up to your body in the beginning, up to an appropriate level in your system at the very beginning. And then at the end, it takes about 72 hours for it to come down to a normalized place afterwards. Now, phase 2, getting out of that weight loss portion, and actually phase 1 is the easiest part. The most difficult part of this whole diet is getting started. But once you're into it, patients can't believe how simple it is, how easy it is to maintain that 500 calories, and how wonderful the responses tend to be, because they lose a lot of weight very quickly. And they're not, as I said, they're not starving or feeling totally wiped out. Phase 2 is your first maintenance phase. It lasts 3 weeks. You're keeping a food journal, so you're actually seeing what you're eating. But instead of just eating 2 meals a day of lunch and supper, you're eating 6 times a day. You have breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, supper, snack. So it feels like you're eating a lot more. You're eating the same types of meats, the same type of proteins, the same type of vegetables and fruits that you had during the actual initial phase and during the weight loss phase, but you're not adding any new starches or sugars. As you add new vegetables, as you add new fruits, as you add new proteins, again, by keeping that journal, you can see if your body is sensitive to any of those foods that you're consuming. For example, we all pretty much assume that broccoli is a very safe product and we eat it for snacks and all. But there are a number of people who, when they eat raw broccoli, it causes inflammation, in part due to the oxalic acid that's present. If they cook it, they don't suddenly have that same problem. Because I've had a number of patients who've had raw broccoli and they'll put on 3 or 5 pounds from the water retention associated with the inflammation from the raw broccoli. You want to weigh yourself daily in all of these phases. It's very important to keep track of where you're going. Number one, if you're in the initial process of losing weight, you certainly can see the change on the scale. It's very visible. It can be a little frustrating because you will stall on occasion. But in general, being on the scale helps people and is very motivating. Taking measurements is also very motivating. In the second phase, you want to maintain that weight that you lost. You want to keep that steady level. So you don't want to have a great amount of fluctuation. You don't want to vary by more than 2 pounds plus or minus. So let's say you lost 30 pounds in your 40-day cycle. You don't want to, in that transition phase, or the 2 transition phases that following it, you don't want to lose or gain more than 2 pounds. And that's because you're working on what's called the weight set point in the brain. That weight set point is very important because if indeed you maintain that particular weight or range for an extended period of time, for some reason the body then understands that that's going to be your normalized weight for an extended period of time. I can tell you saw in those first pictures, I went from 230 pounds to 183, and that was 7 years ago. I'm still within 12 pounds of my HCG weight. I don't do anything an awful lot different, except I did learn there were certain foods that I could not eat and certain foods that were problematic. I also learned portion size. But by maintaining this particular 6-week duration of having a very stable weight, it seems to have helped tremendously over the last 7 years. If indeed you do gain more than 2 pounds, you can have what's called a steak day. A steak day is you skip breakfast and lunch, but you take plenty of fluids throughout the whole course of the day. Then in the evening, you eat a large steak, or what they call a huge lean steak. So you don't necessarily want to have a ribeye or a porterhouse, but maybe a New York strip or a sirloin. It's fairly lean, and you can have anywhere from 12 to 16 ounces of meat. And then you would have either a raw apple or a raw tomato in conjunction with that. Phase 3, which is the second maintenance phase, but the third phase of the HCG before you actually start to live life, is where you slowly start to reintroduce sugars and starches into your lifestyle. When I say slowly, I find that about every 3rd day you add a new starch or a new sugar. So let's say on day 1, where you're entering phase 3, you might want to add rice. On day 3 of phase 3, you might want to add a potato. So days 1 and 2, you're eating just rice. Day 3, 4, 5, you now can add potato to your rice. Then you can add corn or wheat or whatever starch or sugar you're going to add as you progress. If indeed you find, or even melons, from the fruit aspect, but if you find that after eating a particular food that you gain a substantial amount of inflammation or weight on the scale, it means that you may be sensitive to that food. You're not allergic to it, you may be sensitive to it. And with that sensitivity, you are going to increase inflammation, increase water retention. Increase water retention, your body goes into a preservation mode and you start increasing fat storage. So it's very important to keep a journal of what you're doing, to add these foods gradually, because it takes about 72 hours in order to have a response and then for you to recover or recuperate from that response before adding something new. If you eat too many things too quickly, you don't know what the problem was, and it can be very daunting as far as moving on to real life. So the next thing I want to move into are the frequently asked questions. The biggest one we get is, how do I get my HCG? What are the different dosage forms? Now, originally the only dosage form available was an intramuscular injection. You had a needle that was about an inch, inch and a half long. You stuck it into the muscle, into the thigh, into the buttock, into the shoulder, and that was the way to administer it. Since then, we've discovered we have many more options, and many that are much more popular. The intramuscular is still used, and there are some people that do very well with it, but it's not necessary for everyone to use that particular dosage form. I'm going to start with the most user-friendly and most popular dosage forms, and I'll progress through the list. We have basically 5. The first ones that we have are sublingual tablets. Sublingual tablets basically dissolve under the tongue. They get absorbed right through the tissue, right through the submucosal tissue, and use them twice a day. What's really nice about the sublingual tablets is that you do not need to refrigerate the product. They're stable for up to 6 months without refrigeration in storage, and you can travel with them, you can keep them in your purse, you can keep them in your pocket. It's very easy to use. In that same mode of sublingual, we'll go to the sublingual drops. The sublingual drops, and these are all prescription, the sublingual drops do require refrigeration. Same type of approach of use as the sublingual tablets, but they require refrigeration because they're a liquid. They're stable for about 30 days, not refrigerated, but if you want to get beyond that, they'll last for 60 to 70 days, and they're stable according to the laboratory results in the refrigerator. Next, we move into one that I find very useful for people who are on the go, like myself, who are very aggressive and type A personalities, and that's the nasal spray. One spray in each nostril, one time in the morning, put it back in the fridge, you go and you do your day. When you're using the sublingual tablets, the sublingual liquid drops, you have to wait anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour after consuming the product before you're able to eat or drink anything in order to get full absorption. With the nasal spray, it goes up, you're there, you're done. We then find the sub-Q injection to be very, very popular. The sub-Q injection uses an insulin-type needle. It's just a barely over a quarter inch in length. You only withdraw between 1/10 and 2/10 of a milliliter of liquid from the vial, and you stick it into any part of your body. Most people use the belly. They go around in a circle, alternate sites, but basically any part of the body, if there's fat underneath the skin, subcutaneous fat is an appropriate location. Finally, the last thing, which is non-prescription, are the homeopathic sublingual drops. These are available without a prescription. They are used 2 to 3 times daily. The big difference between the homeopathic product and the prescription product is that you'll lose the same amount of weight, but with the homeopathic product, you use about half as much fat. So that means that every pound you lose, you certainly are going to look great for that wedding or for that class reunion or for that special event that's coming up, but long term, you're not going to be able to easily keep as much off. And again, we find this, we've done this with studies where we've measured the amount of fat loss, we've measured the body content, we've looked at fat, muscle, and water presence in both our homeopathic patients as well as our patients who are using the other dosage forms. So another question I get quite often, there's a lot of people who live a vegetarian lifestyle. Now, it's not just girls, but also for religious standards that people will do this. It becomes much more difficult to do this process, to do this diet, because you don't lose as much. You tend to have a little bit more hunger because a lot of the foods that that are vegetarian, that are approved on the diet, simply are not as long-lasting in the system. You're typically losing about half as much with a vegetarian diet as you do with an omnivore diet or omnivorous diet. And there are some, for those who are vegans, They probably have the most difficulty in losing the smallest amount because the most typical proteins there are beans or legumes, which have a fairly substantial starch content. So that means that the ratio of different components of different calories you're consuming is off somewhat. If a vegetarian is going to include dairy or eggs, then those are certainly appropriate. And we find that 3 whites and 1 whole egg is equivalent to 1 protein. For those people who want to do a vegetarian approach or a vegan approach, it is much more challenging. It can be done, but some modifications are necessary if you're a vegan. A lot of our patients, though, will end up going to a pescatarian approach. So that means they'll eat fish. They'll eat the white fish, because white fish is certainly one of the products allowed on the protocol. There's a number of pre-prepared products that are available. Not all vegetarian options are the same. J. Robb has a number of products. Natoya has a number of products. Morningstar has a number of products. But please look at them, because there's a big difference between the amount of calories, between the number of proteins, the amount of fats, and starches that are present. Be very careful with quinoa, Ezekiel bread, and all other breads for that product, and basically all the other Morningstar products. These can be very detrimental to your weight loss. They can stop you immediately, then they can actually end up gaining weight while you're on this. I don't know why that happens, even though you're eating a low-calorie diet with these, but for some reason the body, maybe the BMR drops, and during that time period, but that carbohydrate can make a big difference. So another question we get when problems, are there any medications that have to be careful with the HCG? Hormones, sex hormones, progesterone, testosterone, estradiol, estriol, thyroid hormones, T3, T4, armour thyroid, westroid, the other combinations, synthroid, all of these can have an impact on your basal metabolic rate. All these can have an impact on your body's responding to the change in diet. Steroids, such as prednisone, betamethasone, all these can inhibit the process, the weight loss process. Coumadin is the only drug interaction per se, and that's because you're eating a lot of green leafy vegetables, and those contain vitamin K, and that can interfere with your blood clotting. So INR levels have to be measured if you're on Coumadin and you're going to do this. So exercise. So many people are into exercise, which is a very good thing, but quite often people tend to over-exercise. And exercise can be a stressor. I mentioned earlier that that when you get under a lot of physical stress, your body is going to have inflammation, and it's going to retain water, it's going to store fat. Well, too aggressive an exercise can have that same effect. So if you exercise too much on HCG, you could actually stop your process. Not only can you stop your process, but because you're having a limited protein intake, if indeed you're lifting weights and damaging muscle, which that's how you build bulk, by damaging muscle, by tearing muscle, or micro tears, you don't have enough protein for the repair process. So how much is too much? Moderate exercise is a good thing. Walking, running, spinning, elliptical, stair climbing, those are all things that are appropriate. Anything that you've been doing already on those realms, don't do more of it. Do the same amount or cut back a little bit. There's no heavy weightlifting mentioned. As I said a moment ago, if indeed you tear muscle in the process, you don't have enough protein to repair it. So you're going to feel hurt and achy and run down. If you insist on having some tone, anywhere from 5 to 15 pound kettlebells are appropriate. Most strenuous activities should be limited or restricted while using the HCG, and for the 4 to 6 weeks after completing a course of HCG. Things that use torque, twisting, should be avoided. The reason I say that is that HCG has several effects in the body. Obviously, it mobilizes those fat stores, so you have the source of calories, but also it causes cartilage to become more elastic, or seems to cause it to become more elastic. If you think about during a pregnancy, a woman her body has to be able to expand in the hips and the pelvic area so that it can accommodate the baby growing, so it can accommodate the organs moving around, and so it certainly can give birth, so the pelvis can open for birth. Well, your cartilage does become more elastic, so if indeed you're doing something with great torque, golf, if you're golfing it, if you're good at it, you're going to have some good torque. If you're going to do hot yoga, if you're going to be stretching out, if you're going to do butterflies and weightlifting, these can all cause problems with cartilage damage. So you have to be very careful when doing it. Weightlifting, as I mentioned, both the aspect of the cartilage as well as the muscle tears. The next thing we do is we said that the HCG causes fat to flow through the body. It starts in those storage areas, seems to move into the subcutaneous tissue, and the reason I say that is because it's rare that you ever get that Shar-Pei look where you're wrinkly and crinkly and your skin is sagging. And it's typical when you're doing HCG, the HCG weight loss protocol, you find that your face is very rounded and very full. And if you think about during pregnancy, quite often women are described as glowing or have a moon face. A lot of this may be due to that transition, that migration of fat from the into the sub-Q tissue. So we've had a number of patients who actually start off with a lot of wrinkles that their skin improved dramatically. And that's remained then for years afterwards. My own mother, who is close to 80 years old, did this, and she had lost a tremendous amount of weight using another protocol, and she had gotten very saggy skin. And when she did the HCG as a follow-up, several years later, she found that her skin actually perked up, and it's full and vibrant, and she loves how she looks now. It's not a matter of how much cosmetics you're using afterwards, it's what it does during the process. Well, in that process, one of the dangers of using products is they can interfere with that migration of fat. If you're using anything that has edible oils in it, cosmetics, creams, lotions, lip products, something seemingly as simple as a hand cream can interfere with the transfer or the migration of fat. And as a result, you end up you stop losing weight, and you become very, very hungry. And as my wife puts it, you become hangry, hungry and angry. Not a good thing, especially if you're trying to lose weight and if you have to be with other people. So the HCG doesn't seem to cause any collagen breakdown, so you don't need as much of these products as far as for moisturizers, but there are a number of moisturizers for those who are in more dry areas that find them beneficial. So anything that has an edible oil, avoid. Anything that has a petrolatum base or has a mineral oil in it is typically fine. Products that have glycerin are typically fine. Dry cosmetics, mineralized cosmetics are typically appropriate. Mineralized makeup are typically appropriate because they don't have any edible oils in them. I want to review the foods that are available or approved on the HCG protocol. You basically have lean meats, which are proteins. You have sugars, which are fruit, and you have vegetables. Now, of the lean meats, those include boneless, skinless chicken breast, whitefish, shellfish, lean proteins such as veal, bison, beef, but pork is not permitted. Chicken, dark meat is not permitted. Thighs and legs certainly not appropriate, but the boneless, skinless breasts are appropriate. The limitation on the amount of protein doesn't matter on which protein you consume. It's 100 grams or about 3.5 to 4 ounces of protein. You should measure this each time you're using a protein. If we go over to the vegetables, there's a much greater variety. There's about a dozen different vegetables that are available. These would include a number of different lettuces, spinach, greens, asparagus, tomatoes, cucumbers, beet greens, radishes, celery, onions. Most of these are either 1 or 2 cups, depending on which product it is. Cucumbers are certainly available, as well as tomatoes. So 1 or 2 cups of the vegetables. Then finally, the fruits are very, very limited. There's only 4 fruits allowed, and that would be an apple, an orange, a half a grapefruit, or a handful of strawberries. Obviously, if you have a hand the size of, Shaq, you're gonna have a lot more strawberries than if you have a hand the size of Mary Lou Retton. So an appropriate amount of food for those things is going to vary, and that's your sugar content that you're consuming on a daily basis. So lean protein, vegetable, and fruit twice a day. Try to mix it up. Don't mix 2 fruits. Don't mix 2 vegetables. You can mix proteins. For example, I've written several recipes that have, one of them is a fish stew. It's a bouillabaisse type of food, of soup, that's very flavorful and very wonderful and very filling. So the question often comes up, what happens if you're hungry? What if I'm hungry? What if I am just can't get out through my head that 500 calories a day is enough? I rarely have found this to be a real big issue. It's normal to have some hunger. It's normal to have boredom hunger at the end of the day, where you get home, you finish the day, you've had your dinner, you're sitting down, you're watching TV, and you normally would go and you grab a brownie or you grab a bag of chips. Well, if you want to have something to eat during that time period, save your fruit for that time period. If you really have to have something that doesn't work, have a cup of cut up celery as a snack. It's normal to have some hunger. It's not normal to be famished. It's not normal to want to eat a limb or eat a small child. But if indeed you have that aggressive hunger, then something's wrong. It's possible that if you're using a sublingual product, you're not absorbing it fully. Perhaps you're a high salivator and you're using the sublingual drops. Well, those sublingual drops are because you're salivating so much are getting swallowed instead of absorbed through the tissue. Maybe you're a low salivator and using a sublingual tablet. Well, perhaps you don't have it in the mouth long enough and you're not generating enough saliva in order for it to be absorbed. So depending on what the problem is and what your individual case is, can help to determine what your treatment or what your appropriate tool should be for changing that. One of the other things that I find is that with the nasal sprays, if a person has a long history of sinus issues, or if they've had some drug abuse of the nasal passages, such as cocaine use, it's not a good idea to use that product because they may have a lot of necrosis or have some necrosis of the tissues. So you don't have as much capillary presence in order to have full absorption of the product. The other thing is that if you're just finding that you have that boredom evening hunger, avoid some of the cues. Instead of watching TV, read a book. Instead of watching TV in the kitchen, watch TV in the family room. Change something so you don't get those same cues. A person really has to eat between noon and 1 p.m. on the daily basis during the 500 calorie phase. If you don't get a chance to eat between noon and 1, you're going to be incredibly hungry later in the day. If you wait until 3 o'clock, it's too late. You have to have supper between 6 and 8. If you wait too long, your body's going to end up storing fat and calories. There's been a number of studies that have demonstrated this, that those patients who eat later in the evening tend to gain more weight. So if you wait too long to eat, you're going to be hungry, you're going to gain weight. You really need to have a lot of fluid intake. I've said this several times, minimum 2 to 3 liters a day. My wife loved this diet. She always sits with a quart of water, ice water next to her. She thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. She was able to drink, instead of 2 or 3 liters a day, she was up to 6 liters a day. She felt great. Granted, she was constantly in the bathroom, but she felt absolutely fantastic. Some people will, as I said, some people will allow themselves to have a half a cup or a cup of celery, or they'll save their fruit. Instead of having it at dinner, they'll have it a little bit later. But again, these are some of the things some of the tools that you'll find as an individual patient, as an individual person doing it, of what works for you. If all those things fail, what happens if I'm still hungry? Well, you can try using some xylitol chewing gum. You can try using some stevia chewing gum. As I said, separate those fruits away from the other meals, and try to avoid the cues that are giving you those hunger things. So here's a real good problem. What if I lose all that I want to lose in less than 21 days? Because you can't, as I said, 40 days is the max, but 21 to 23 days is the minimum. So let's say I want to lose 15 pounds, and I've lost 15 pounds in the first 2 weeks. What do I do? What a horrible thing to be successful, right? Well, you can't just stop. You have to make it through to those 21 to 23 days minimum before you go through your transitions, before you get rid of the HCG and go through your 500 calories. During that time, once you've lost all that weight that you've wanted to lose and there's still time left, very simply increase your caloric intake to 750 calories per day. This seems to work for the vast majority of patients. Watch yourself on the scale. Watch that 2 pounds up or down. Make sure you maintain stability. Keep your fluid intake going. But bottom line is you're going to have long-term success if you follow all these rules and then go through your transition phases. Remember, the transition phases are not to lose weight. They're to maintain weight, to maintain that weight set point in the brain so that you get to the right place at the right time. So what if I stop losing weight before I'm done with the protocol? Well, there's lots of stalls. Lots of things will happen to you in the process where you'll get to a certain point and you stop. I know that when I was losing weight for years and years, I was at a particular weight and I just could not get any lower when I first started. Just stopped right there. My first round of HCG was a full 32 days, or 36 days. I lost 32 pounds. I had to stop early because I had other conflicts going on in my life. The second time I did it, I got to 14 pounds of weight loss at only 19 days. My wife said, honey, you're done. And I said, yes, dear, because I'm a smart husband. I listen to what my wife tells me. Happy wife, happy life. We all know that, right? Those of us who are married. But stalling is normal. Stalling is you'll hit a plateau. It may be because it was at a weight you were at for a long time previously in your life. It may be for some other reason. You may not be losing weight, losing fat on the scale, or weight on the scale, not necessarily fat, but you may not be losing weight on the scale at a certain point. But if you take your measurements on a weekly basis, if you take a look at how your clothing fits you, your body is still changing. Things are moving around. You are losing weight. You are losing fat. So don't panic. Keep up what you're doing. It's going to work. There are some solutions that you'll find on the internet. There's some solutions you'll find in various references that will help in the stalling. Apple cider vinegar is one that's purported to work. There's a lot of people that swear by it. I've had mixed results with our patients who have used it. You can do a modified steak day. You can eliminate your grissini or your maltose, your starches that you're permitted on the diet, because sometimes it's that wheat or gluten product that can have a problem. It has an inflammatory product. But basically, stick to the program. Your weight loss will resume. Your fat loss will resume. You're going to reach your goals. I mentioned that inflammation can stymie weight loss. Surgery is inflammation. Surgery is a challenge to the body. It's an insult to the system. So how long after I've had surgery do I have to wait before I start the HCG protocol? We usually tell people 6 weeks. Depending on this type of surgery, it may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but typically that's a magic number of 6 weeks. How many cycles can I do? If you're a 600-pound patient and you want to get down to 300 pounds, you're not going to do it in one cycle. Remember, you can only lose about 32 to 34 pounds in a single cycle. Losing more than that is simply not appropriate. So as people do successive cycles, they have to have a break in between them. Between a first and second cycle, about 3 weeks appropriately. Between a second and third cycle, about 6 weeks. Third and fourth, 9. Fourth and fifth, 12. Fifth and sixth, 15. So yes, you have almost 4 months in between a fifth and sixth cycle. But remember, you want to lose, if you're losing a lot of weight, you want to lose that for the long run, for the long term. You want to have those long-term benefits. So being patient will help you to reach your goals. And one of the two most difficult words in the English language are be patient. It's important also in between cycles that a person has an opportunity to learn to live. You're not always going to be on a 500-calorie diet. You have to learn to live in the real world. Find out what foods are appropriate for you. Find out what foods are problematic. Then we get into some of the other problems. How long is the HCG good out of the fridge? I mentioned before, it's good for 30 days, anything except for the tablet, which does not require refrigeration. If you leave it out overnight, it shouldn't be a problem. A lot of people will forget. It hasn't gone bad unless you happen to stick it on a radiator or something, or in direct sunlight. Then it can cause a problem. Refrigerated is good for 60 to 70 days. If I've missed a couple of days, what do? You don't have to go back to the beginning. It all depends on how far along you are in the process. If you're at day 23 or 25 or 30, just get right back on the wagon, get right back on the horse and keep finishing up your process. If you're really early in the process, in the first 3 to 5 days, well, then maybe you should take about a 4 or 5 day break. You got plenty of HCG there to last your entire duration, and then just start from scratch with your fat consumption and go into your weight loss process. Here are a couple of pictures. This is my wife and I in 2010. That was in Cancun, and we were on a dive boat. And if I could find the young man who said, "Senor, senor, can you take my picture?" I would hug and kiss him and give him a $100 tip. Maybe I'd give him a $200 tip, because he changed my life with having this photograph. Because a year later, in January of 2011, there's my wife and I at a much nicer vacation in Puerto Vallarta. And here she'd gone from a size 20 to a size 12. I'd gone from 230 pounds to 183. It changed our lives. You can get HCG from Mark Drugs in Roselle or Deerfield. Our 800 number is, toll-free number is 1-800-776-4378. That's 1-800-776-4378. Or go to markdrugs.com for more information. This entire presentation is available on our website, as well as a number of other written pieces of information. A lot of literature is available that is very beneficial. I recommend highly Linda Prinster's book, HCG, The Weight Loss Cure. It's a wonderful reference that has over 1,000 different foods. It tells when you can eat them, what you can eat. It also has the original manuscript from Dr. Simeon's that was written in the before World War II and then published in the 1950s. There's just a tremendous amount of data in there that's very, very beneficial. With that, I want to thank everyone who's watched this presentation. Please contact us at Mark Drugs at 630-529-3400 or at 800-776-4378. Our Deerfield location on Milwaukee Avenue is 847-419-9898. Thank you very much.